Happy 2026, everyone. Welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. This guy over here is Vlad, and we're super happy, excited, enthused after a couple of weeks off for vacation type things for one of us, maybe less than vacation type things for another one of us. Having said that, super excited to get back into Manufacturing Hub in 2026. We've got a full, awesome year scheduled. And man, it is scheduling fast. So if you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. We're very excited to go ahead and talk a little bit about Manufacturing Hub, but we do realize this is a new year and we may have new folks coming in to watch Manufacturing Hub. So if you guys are new here, this is somehow the first, this episode 241 is the first episode you guys have come across. Welcome. Just about every week, about 60 times a year, myself, Dave Griffith, and my co-host, this guy over here, Vlad Romanov, we go live or post a couple of videos talking to other practitioners, talking about fun, interesting topics. We talk a lot, at least in the last year, about AI in the manufacturing space. We'll go talk about robotics. We'll go talk about industrial data. We'll go talk about cybersecurity and networking, and basically everything that it takes to go run your plant. And as we get through all of those things, we talk a lot about the unfun things that are change management and everything else. Every month, or just about every month, we pick a theme. Our first theme is going to be on the modernization of the technology stack. And our goal is to have 4 different guests come and talk to us about different topics. And so if you know a lot about it, we hope you learn a little bit. And if you know nothing about it, we hope you guys get to go listen to these 4 episodes and you get to go learn a lot about it. Along the way, we do our very best to go bring in folks in order to, again, as guests, but also we love our chat. So if you guys are watching live, say hi, tell us where you're watching from, be it on LinkedIn or YouTube or any of the other channels. Tell us where you're physically watching. Most of our guests are in North America, but every once in a while, we've got some guests from Europe. We've got some folks from Australia. We've got some folks from Africa who certainly pop in to say hi, either very early in the morning for some of you or very late in the evening for others of you. Having said that, and without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump in and tell you a little bit about Vlad and myself. Vlad, would you like to go introduce to everyone?
I was going to let you do both of the intros since you've
Perfect.
Both
Yes.
bios. I know you do usually a good job, so I'll let you just keep holding on to the mic.
I love this. So if this is your first time watching, every once in a while, Vlad and I do something fun where it's mostly me just introducing both of us. So I will go first. Hey, everyone. My name is Dave Griffith. I've been in the industrial automation space and manufacturing for 17 plus years. My technical background is in aviation and automation, and I have worked across most industries, as you see. On my day job, I run a company called Kaplan Solutions for the last 7 years, and our focus is very much on where operational excellence meets the data side, and most of the time our work is done leveraging inductive automation's ignition. And so that is the majority of the work that we do. If that fits or you guys want to say hi, please come say hi to me. This guy over here, his name is Vlad Romanov. He does a whole lot of things. If he was going to tell you about it, it would take up the entire hour of the show. I'll give you the super quick rundown. A lot of you, if you don't know him from Manufacturing Hub, you might know him from a super awesome training site called Solus PLC that Vlad started at a bunch of Holiday Inn Expresses while he was working for several Fortune 50 organizations. When he's not doing that, he's doing systems integration and other consulting type work under his banner that is Joltech. And so his background, lots of big Fortune 50 companies. Lots of big Fortune 50 companies at facilities in the middle of nowhere, very deep on the data side, building his own solutions, working on very bespoke solutions across the entirety of the technology stack. And you'll notice he's got a little bit of everything behind him. We see some Siemens IPCs. I see some Siemens controllers. I can't see what's on top of that. And above that is his MBA from McGill University. And then a whole bunch of books. And maybe we'll go get a couple of book recommendations from Vlad at the end. Having said that, I want to let you guys know where to go catch us. So every year, Vlad and I do Manufacturing Hub. We've kind of narrowed it down to 3 shows. And so our top 3 of where you're going to find us just about every year. The ProveIt conference, that's going to be in Dallas, Texas, and that's going to be February 16th through 20th. We'll be at Automate, which this year is in Chicago and is in June the 22nd through 26th. And then we are fully expecting to be back at the Ignition Community Conference for our 3rd year in a row. It's in Sacramento, California in September. And man, June and September seem like a long way away, but we're also getting ready to go talk about all this fun ProveIt stuff coming up. And then it'll be February, and then it'll be September. And I won't know where the last 60 episodes have gone. So if you guys are going to go to any of those, let us know. We'll go ahead and drop links in the chat and the show notes. And if you guys have any other fun conferences, be it big or small, that you think we should go check out, please go ahead and let us know. We're always interested and always looking for some good recommendations.
Good. I will add that some other places to find us. Obviously, we are broadcasting on LinkedIn as well as our YouTube channel and a few other socials. We also publish the actual audio from the podcasts on a variety of different podcasting platforms, and that's Spotify, that's Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of other venues. So if you are unable to make the live session, obviously you can rewatch it. I would recommend YouTube to be a little bit better, because I know that things on LinkedIn tend to get a little bit buried, but there's going to be a recording on YouTube of this session as well as the previous episodes, but you can also catch the audio. I personally, again, carry my podcasts on my phone and obviously just listen to the audio as I'm walking or maybe exercising or doing something else. So it is a convenient way to listen in. Of course, there's the downside of not being able to ask us questions. And as Dave is typing in on LinkedIn, we are live every Wednesday, so you can tune in and ask us some of the questions as they relate to that episode for us or for the guest that we have on. There will be also, and Dave and I are still discussing this a little bit in the background, so we might be at other trade shows independently and or together. It is still TBD, so there might be other mentions of different shows that we will make throughout the year. If you have suggestions for us to attend maybe specific or interesting events, I would definitely be curious. But otherwise, we will definitely catch you at one of the 3 that Dave has mentioned. And so I guess as Dave continues to frantically type in the messages and I can hear all the keyboard clicks, I'm just going to transition us perhaps to the main content of today's episode. And our goal, and you've mentioned this a little bit, Dave, earlier, is always to educate the community, but also to learn ourselves to an extent as we do some of the research and the preparation for some of these conversations. But the goal is to spend the hour discussing the topics that are either changing in manufacturing or impacting manufacturing, impacting industrial automation, and all of those things. And so, of course, one of the biggest questions in a very general sense is the impact that AI is having on manufacturing, our thoughts on that front. And of course, we do want to break this down a little bit further. But before we do that, Dave, do you have any general, maybe higher level comments as far as AI for manufacturing goes?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting, right? I think if we look back over the last 12 months, I think 12-ish months ago, ChatGPT was out. We were talking a little bit about ChatGPT, and Vlad and I had a really honest conversation when we were talking about themes for 2025. And we came up with, we weren't sure that we could put together 4 separate conversations about AI in manufacturing. And I feel like over the course of last year, we probably talked about AI in manufacturing for 20 or 30 hours. Some of them very specific topics, talking about tools with Billy Albritton and some other folks. Some of them much more, and we have this AI tool, and this is how we're looking at AI. And then on my side, personally, we had a number of conversations from small to medium manufacturers all the way through the Fortune 5000. And I feel like I couldn't get through a month without having one or two separate conversations
Hmm.
about AI. And a lot of it was just kind of very high level. Hey, someone in our organization saw AI. Someone like my mom, for instance, like Dave's physical mom, like saw AI on 60 Minutes or one of those news programs that some people watch, and they're like, "Oh, we should be careful about this," or "Oh, we should go look at all of these things." And so I feel like the world is certainly shifted as to actual AI applications, which we'll get into in a minute or three. That is a little different than where the world is, right? So a year ago, we were talking about Chat GPT and everyone Chat GPTing things and Chat GPT planning parties and planning road trips. And now I feel like a lot of those conversations are, can we build 57 more data centers in the next 6 months? And where do we get the power to go run all of the GPUs and all of the RAM that have been gone from the market because they're all going into industrial data centers? So overall, I think that the conversation has become more of, hey, is this a thing that we should be aware of? And more, hey, AI is something that we will almost certainly live with for the rest of our lives. But how useful is it? And in which
Hmm.
applications is it useful? And maybe to some extent, do the benefits outweigh the physical costs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the question on everyone's mind, regardless of, their industry within manufacturing or even outside of manufacturing as a vertical. I would say, and this is why, as I have conversations around I always ask a lot of different questions because I think it has certainly has demonstrated its impact on a set of industries or a set of applications, and it has perhaps lacked in that ROI in other areas. So I think that as we look at, and we discussed this a little bit off stream, as we look at data, I think it's important to understand what is an aggregate of, multiple different verticals
Mm-hmm.
and what is maybe a subset of that data that is representative of the application that you're trying to understand to get a better picture, because I think it's important to understand who's failing or who's succeeding in which ways, in what areas. I personally know multiple people that have gotten laid off because of AI, right? So there's going to be some negative impacts
Mm-hmm.
as a result of it, but there's also going to be a lot of organizations. I actually spoke to a systems architect only a couple of weeks ago who's bringing in a lot of, I would say, greener engineers that have demonstrated the use of AI to be highly beneficial for the organization, right? So I think things are getting better. Everyone's trying to still figure out how it truly fits. There's going to be companies that have just purchased, a license of ChatGPT or Copilot for those that are locked in on Microsoft, to companies that have deployed entire AI first or machine learning first teams that are seeking to understand this digital transformation and technology. So, if we transition maybe into more specific topics when it comes to AI in manufacturing, and we certainly broke this down a little bit further, Dave and I, again, like off stream, I would want to start maybe with the state of AI when it comes to plant floor data and operations, right? So, when it comes to maybe extracting information from your control systems, maybe if it's manual entries from operators. Are you hearing any interesting applications that have succeeded, that have failed, and ultimately for what reasons, I guess, on either side, Dave?
Yeah, I think this is interesting, and I have candidly struggled to come up with very many success stories that
Mhm.
are talked about, right? So I am sure that
Yep.
there are success stories when it comes to this. I have just not seen very many success stories that are mature enough that we can go through and have the conversation when it comes to this, as to if it goes back to some of those 2025 MIT studies alleging that 95% of the AI industrial enterprise applications fail, or if it's just that some groups have found a bunch of success, and because we found a bunch of success, we're not sharing with it because we think it's a competitive advantage. That remains to
Mhm.
be seen, and I think that the listener at home can go ahead and perhaps read between the lines as to what they're seeing. Having said that, One of the most interesting series of those applications that I know of, that Vlad and I have covered since, I suppose, its inception now, 2.5 years ago, is the Siemens and NVIDIA and Microsoft industrial copilots, and the industrial metaverse, and it kind of spirals upward from there. Having said that, I think that that Siemens in particular is continuing to invest significant numbers of dollars into those plant floor style tools. Having said that, the vast majority of those that I've seen still need the information. And so many of the conversations that I am personally having go to, hey, we would like to get to this point. And so I'm like, hey, this is fantastic. What are you guys doing on the data collection side? Or do you have an MES? Or do you have a historian of some sort? And I'd say about 80% of those responses basically come back to, we have paper and a clipboard, and sometimes we go ahead and we write, maybe 90% of those responses are, we have paper and a clipboard. So I think that there are still lots of foundational basic steps that will be needed to be completed on the Industry 3 and the Industry 4 kind of very base level blocks before we move to the next phase of, we can go ahead and deploy. And that's not even getting into one of our sub favorite topics of what does that change management look like? Of,
Right.
hey, it's difficult enough to get people to use tools that are being designed, much less tools that they actively believe are trying to go replace them as workers on the plant floor. You on your side, Vlad, are you seeing or hearing about any kind of like plant floor data and operations tools that can be talked about?
I look again. I resonate with what you're saying because my conversations have been relatively similar. I have talked to a number of groups that are trying to figure this out. But as you mention it, right, and I think about the reason as to why it is complex, it seems to me that there's basically, again, and I hate to say this, but there's this ITOT, and I don't want to say it's a convergence in this case. I think there is still a difference between the two camps. And I believe that the people that are highly skilled in the OT space, and I talk about usually integrators and developers, of PLCs up to the SCADA layer, are not necessarily equipped to build software from scratch, right? They are integrators for that reason. And so they perhaps lack the skill to build a bespoke, I want to say like AI slash MCP based solution. And then on the other side, you have groups that are strong software backgrounds. And again, we've talked to a variety of different companies, and I'm sure you also get a lot of different pitches about, well, we've built this AI, it's just going to take all the information from the plant floor, just build the dashboards. And I think that they lack the understanding of the state of OT as you've described, and some of the steps that you simply cannot skip, right? And again, to get more specific, is you have different teams, obviously, that some of them understand the process side, some of them understand the mechanical side, and then there's going to be programmers that maybe tie those two together. But ultimately it is very often undocumented. If it is obviously automated, it is very difficult to get full context from the bottom of the plant floor into an MES. At best, you're going to get, certain tag triggers, and you're going to get telemetry, so to speak, data, but you're not going to get easily digestible LLM ready information. And there are groups that are trying to do this. Again, I've talked to a number of not only consultants, but also groups that are building connectors and software. But I've not yet heard of a case where this has been, a proven ROI. This becomes very expensive at scale. We're talking about very different latencies of tags being consumed when it comes to manufacturing versus any other. I don't want to say any other software system, but general software systems. I think that historians in manufacturing have been designed to ingest very large amounts of data. So I think that groups are extremely excited when they get told that AI can process all of that information, but when they see the amount of tokens that are needed to process said data set, they very quickly become, unenthused, and also, I don't want to say confused, but ultimately, again, it goes back to the point that you've made. I need to understand like the ROI that we're going to get out of this, and if it's an R&D project, it's very difficult to give them the green light when it's uncertain what's going to happen. So, anyways, that's the conversations that have been happening on my side, at least when plant floor data is concerned. I think that there's going to be groups that figure out the dashboarding side for data, right? So I think that it's going to be easier to make sort of the UI UX. But as far as ingesting data and synthesizing, information for operators and for decision makers higher up in the chain, I think it's going to be difficult. And to be honest with you, I am looking for more of those proof of concept applications. The ones that I have seen, again, have been in demo environments. And I understand that usually they will, to some extent, obstruct some of those complexities that at least you and I see in the real world, and make it easier to say, well, I've built this chatbot that gets all the information, all the data. And so here's the result it's giving me.
Absolutely no. I would 100% agree with. I would 100% agree with that. I think that there are some teams that are very good on the software side. I think that the value in many of those implementations are time to value, or time to implementation, and doing that quickly. When you talk about chucking a whole bunch of automation data silos together,
Mhm.
and solving some of those problems. Those are problems that we haven't been able to solve for the last 10 to 20 years. And then we try
Yep.
to go do it with AI. We have a lot of those issues, right? So I think
Yep.
that there probably is a lot of R&D. I think trying to do it broad scale to groups that aren't collecting the data, much less broad scale to groups that are collecting the data, but the data is in 27 different formats, right? I think all of that is difficult, and only time will tell as to the direction that we see people go. When
Hmm.
we internally are talking about AI tools, most of the tools that we're looking at are not tools that could in theory solve a whole bunch of these problems, right? It's this is the type of system that we regularly see in the market. How can we go extract some of that information in order to provide very quick constructive feedback on these are the top 5, these are the top 10 things that we would do in the next immediately to 6 months from now in order to go solve issues that we're seeing that are sometimes difficult to go see by humans kind of staring at a whole bunch of different pieces of the data. So that is the direction that we internally are going, because I don't think the market is quite ready for a lot of those other things. And as you mentioned, tokens, Vlad, that is not really something that we've talked about very much.
Hmm.
I think we're going to see AI get a lot more expensive very quickly.
Yes,
As more and
absolutely.
more people are using it, and as there's the need for more GPU, and there's the need for more RAMs and data centers and power and all of this, it is only going to get more and more expensive, which is going to make all of these things more and more difficult. And you can go talk about different models. You can go talk about running it on your own hardware. You can go talk about attempting to buy the hardware, which is only getting more and more difficult to attempt to do in order to go do that. All of those things are all of those things are difficult, and I imagine that we're going to continue to see them be more difficult, perhaps exponentially more difficult as we continue in that direction.
Absolutely. And I would say, and again, I've had many conversations around this with different colleagues. I believe that regardless of your position, I've always encouraged people to go and try the, like not the basic version of, let's say, ChatGPT, Gemini, or any one of the, I want to say LLM tools, but the tokenized version, just to see how much it actually costs currently, but also to realize that most of these companies are very heavily subsidized by, the capital that they have raised over the last couple of years. And so usually you are not paying the full price until that money runs out. And obviously, they need to be profitable. But again, I think that's a whole other conversation on how startups work and how financials are going to be allocated. But ultimately, I believe that it all comes down to, when you come in and you're looking to run some of these projects, number one, you're going to realize what the cost is from an AI standpoint for an enterprise organization. Number two, as we have mentioned, you will realize what the bill is going to be to change your entire architecture and basically tie in all that data, store the data, send the data, whether that's locally on the hardware on on-prem servers or in the cloud. And number three, we haven't talked about this, and I'm sure there's going to be a full episode in 2026, change management, and what does it actually take to educate your operators to produce the context necessary for AI to make the decisions and basically them make some of the calls that AI is recommending. I do want to move us a little bit further along, Dave, because we can certainly spend an entire episode on AI and talk about equipment development, commissioning, and engineering of new projects, right? And I'll probably kick us off because I have done a couple of these last year and have some scheduled in 2026. So I think what's interesting, right, and this is a conversation I've had with multiple engineers from our industry, is that it seems to me that at this stage, AI is an efficiency booster for those that have the experience, and it is a deficiency for those that don't, right? And what I mean by that is, if you allow an engineer that's during commissioning basically accesses ChatGPT or Gemini or any other, again, like flavor of the LLM, and they understand the system, they can, for example, ask a question of, I have this specific fault. What do you recommend? They're going to get 3 to 5 suggestions. They will know with the experience what can or what shouldn't or should be done, right? But if you don't have that context and those years of experience, it is very easy to fall in the trap during the commissioning or even the engineering phase to make the assumption that the AI is giving you the right answer. So ultimately, you end up spending more time figuring out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, because I think that there's a lot of, or I guess there's a lack of information in our specific industry as opposed to traditional software where you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of pages on Stack Overflow documentation that is extremely robust, examples from engineers from top companies in the world, that write white papers and different open source tools, as opposed to manufacturing, where it is a little bit harder to make sense of what is right and what is wrong. So at least that is my current perspective when it comes to commissioning or engineering projects in our space as it relates to LLMs. I'm curious to hear what you have seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think you very much hit the nail on the head, right? If you are good and skilled and understand what's going on to begin with, so if you are a senior engineer, senior developer plus,
Hmm.
these tools are going to be helpful for you, probably, if you run into issues that you are unaware of, and you'll generally have an idea of, yes, this makes sense, this is the direction I should go look at, or hey, this third option or this first option they gave me sounds a bit insane. Let me go do some more research before I start typing things into a command line and go asking questions and maybe wipe the entire project that's probably not backed up, sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
having said that, I think it's really going to help the people who do have the experience. But conversely, I think it really could, in the as short as medium term, maybe even short term, cripple a number of these companies who are just attempting to leverage these tools and not creating a bunch of junior engineers or junior developers to go ahead and teach them the basics so that they can go move up to the next level, so that they can continue to move forward, and progress in their careers, be it with that organization or outside of that organization, and continue to go make junior engineers. If we run out
Yeah.
of junior engineers and then we run out of senior engineers, we're not going to have an LLM or any sort of AI tool that's going to be able to go backfill a bunch of the grunt work that the junior engineers have to do in order, well, period, much less in order to become senior engineers. So I think
Yep.
that is, we have talked about on the show with many people the gray wave or the gray tsunami, or a lot of these things of some of the older generations aging out and there not being enough senior staff in order to go ahead and backfill them. Well, now we're in the middle of, we've got a bunch of medium and hopefully senior staff. We may lose the top end and there may be no bottom end, and in 5 to 10 years we may not be able to go ahead and continue to run. So I think that while these tools are great, if we don't continue the foundational basis of continuing to create junior engineers so that we can have more senior engineers that can create more junior engineers, we're just going to run out of the bottom of it, and well, we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very interesting dilemma, right? And I think that the difference between, again, traditional software where a junior engineer can pick up some of these tools and basically run tests that are to some extent non-intrusive. Like if you make an example of a website, you could send that web page, to 5% or 10% of the users. If there is an error, you can just revert back to the previous system. That is not possible in manufacturing, right? You don't have access to, I want to say, and again, this is a whole other maybe topic of digital twin and whether or not that's possible. And maybe for some companies it is, but in a general sense, I would say that it is maybe even scarier to send out a junior equipped with AI that's going to blindly take its word and do whatever it recommends. So I think there will be maybe some pullback on teams. Whereas, and again, this is a whole other like episode on cost analysis. If you're a manufacturer and you have a site with, let's say, one very senior person with maybe five more junior people. And again, when I say junior, maybe that's 1 to like 3 years of experience that are being brought up. Well, I would maybe see a consolidation of that team into, three seniors and maybe 1 to 2 juniors instead. And cost wise, it will be almost a wash. But again, to your point, is that going to be sustainable? And who's going to be bringing up those juniors up into those senior roles? And are there enough senior guys, on the market looking for opportunities to even cover that kind of an initiative? So I think there's going to be some probably slow changes, but we'll see where the industry goes.
Absolutely. And I would say to that point before we get off of it is I see like the top end of the senior market go up every year, right? I see that the top end of the senior market go up, I don't know, 5 to 15% year after year. When most people I know change jobs, it's not for insignificant amounts of money. And yeah, so some of those senior engineers become very costly
Yep.
very fast. And I don't know. There are certainly some times where I could go fill 3 junior engineers for the same cost as 1 senior engineer. Having said that, absolutely. Dean is in the comments saying using AI to fix multi-$1,000 machines is terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah, yes, I would agree. But soon we're going to have AI fix a machine with AI on it, right? And it'll either be really good or it will just completely it'll be really good or it will just completely wipe the entirety of both of those machines.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I guess I do have a very brief story maybe on that side that I can share, obviously without any details of the customers. So I came in at a tail end of one of the failing projects to revamp a machine last year. And basically what I saw was that a lot of junior engineers, again, were querying ChatGPT to figure out what was wrong with a different flavor of a PowerFlex drive. And of course, again, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of context, let's say on the 525 or 523 series, but some of the more nuanced applications are going to be difficult for LLMs to process. And what was happening was that they were adjusting basically the wrong parameters based on the recommendation from AI. And they were just basically stuck in a loop where AI with very, I would say, like with a lot of confidence, tell them like, well, you need to adjust these acceleration or deceleration parameters. You need to change this, relay that fires a specific like brake and regenerative resistances. But long story short, it is a challenge, right? It is definitely being used by people, and I think to understand where it can fail or work is to have that experience. So, in any case, I don't think it's going away. I think that people will continue to use it. Whether or not it's going to be responsibly, I think, is a whole other question and conversation. But I do agree with what Dean is saying. I think it has to be used with caution, but it does come in. I'll give you another example. So, for example, if you take Ignition, if you're looking to generate some of the scripts for even generating something as simple as a momentary push button, you can have it generate a lot of simple scripts for different applications of that nature because it's simple enough. It can be tested. It doesn't usually have any intrusive results if it were to fail, at least until it gets into production. So it's definitely a time saver on certain fronts. Moving us into back end work, and here I listed P&L, supply chains. I would bundle in proposal writing. We'll talk about like systems integration a little bit later, but ultimately some of the back end as it is impacted by AI in manufacturing. And so I will start with the general comments, right? So as we've talked a lot about on the higher level, there is usually more information within any business available at that level. So I think that a lot more financial roles, a lot more sort of like accounting roles, and those that seek to understand data that is in a good format will be impacted, right? So you can generate reports a lot better. You can also parse through financial reports a lot better. You can identify. So again, if you have done any booking and or financial accounting, you know that you need to produce a P&L at the end of usually different fiscal periods. That could be a month, that could be, a quarter or a year. You can very easily identify what makes sense to address based on KPIs for certain production metrics. And I've certainly heard a lot of conversations and a lot of successes of individuals applying those types of queries to the data. There's also the question on that front, as I mentioned it, the security of information for a specific organization. And I've actually had multiple conversations with individuals that would blatantly tell me that they've just put all of that information inside of, open LLMs, which surprised me quite a bit. I think that there's going to be a lot of, again, change management, which we don't need to get into today, that will have to regulate how AI is actually being used. And again, there are options to use AI on prem and isolated from the general which we'll call from the general servers. There's obviously skepticism as to what that actually means and how that data truly flows. So I think there's going to be some questions when it comes to, again, this back end work that does expose to an extent the information and data from various businesses into the open world. And as much as I would like to say that everyone is as careful as they can be, I can only imagine that there's a lot of different leaks when it comes to data. And again, individuals just running ChatGPT in the web or running Copilot in the web. And there's a lot of that information being shared with the outside world. So I think there are improvements in these areas. And I'm curious to hear what you have seen, Dave.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. That is probably where I use AI tools the most. Right, go and scrape a website of this potential client. Go tell me about this, or hey, I need to go write, I don't know, 10 bullet points on CI/CD and best practices within this specific area, or hey, go tell me about all of the potential customers or the potential vendors at this trade show, or something like that, and go ask them to go kind of identify who would be the correct people and the best people for me to talk to. So I think that is certainly interesting. On my side, I haven't put anything that is not public information into the LLMs. Uh,
Hmm.
I have some clients who are very much on the absolutely no use of this whatsoever. I've got other clients who are like, hey, we have no written regulations, so like, can we save some money if you guys use these tools on these projects? So I have found both extremes in there. Having said that, as we have looked at these different LLMs and these tools for some of our solutions, I suppose once you get to the enterprise, sometimes the team, but certainly the enterprise level of paying for these solutions, they promise that all of your information is in its own enterprise container. And it will not be shared and used on any of the models. And they've got SOC 2 compliance and they've got all of these other things. So at the end of the day, it really begs the question of, do you trust these groups? If you trust these groups, sure. I'm just saying, Vlad, it goes down to the, if you trust these groups, if I trust these groups, awesome, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and believe them. If I don't trust these groups, it doesn't matter what they say. I will be the one losing if and when my information gets leaked. Having said that, I've also followed a couple of groups that I know fairly well as they go and build their own llama models or OLLAMA models. Having said that, like just seeing the amount of work that they've put into it, and it's mostly just side projects, but seeing the amount of work that they've put into it and everything else that they're doing, man, it's really hard to replicate for $20 or $30 per user per month in order to get even close. And that's assuming you have your own hardware that already currently exists on site that you can go run your models on, and you're not, or you put it in a container somewhere, right? At a collab, or you're renting other internet server spaces. So again, it's one of those things that I think it's interesting. And I feel like that almost like drives us into cybersecurity. So can we talk a little bit about our thoughts and predictions re cybersecurity for 2026? And I feel like
Sure.
AI probably is the thing that we need to go kick off with, because again, as we were talking about it, it's one of those. You either believe the groups and that you're going to be secure and you follow your compliance. And if you have SOC 2 compliance, hey, if I have a need for SOC 2 compliance, I can go use OpenAI. I can almost certainly go use Claude, although I haven't looked at the Claude information. But OpenAI and ChatGPT has SOC 2 compliance when it comes to the enterprise solutions. And so it really depends upon a lot of things. And again, it's really hard to beat those billions and billions of dollars that other groups are investing. And I mean, honestly, Vlad, that may be the biggest potential cybersecurity breach. Because what do we talk about when we talk about cybersecurity? We talk about the easiest access is the human access, or the human phishing, or the social engineering. And what better than social engineering than just giving someone a fairly free version of ChatGPT and saying, hey, please go put all of your company's private information here and then go query your financial information from my ChatGPT chatbot on the web.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, right? And maybe allow me to take a quick step back, right? Because I think we had listed cybersecurity in a general sense, but it obviously is tied to AI, as you have mentioned. But ultimately, for me, taking that step back, what I have witnessed last year is that many companies are frantically looking to revamp their operations as it relates to cybersecurity for a couple of reasons, but the main one being the regulations that have already been implemented in the EU are being transitioned into North America. And I don't know all the specifics of the regulations, but my general understanding, and you've been in some of those conversations, Dave, is that if you are a major supplier within specific verticals, right, whether that's food, whether that's medication or healthcare, so pharma, if you're an automotive supplier and your operations get disrupted as a result of ransomware attacks or cybersecurity breaches, right? Again, like obviously we can expand on that, but I think that's a whole conversation of its own. Then you will be fined, right? And the logic behind that is because in 2005 we had a couple of examples, but ultimately there are a lot more that have not been disclosed. I'm assuming if you are you have been breached, that is not something that you would like to divulge publicly for many reasons. But basically, if a critical piece of infrastructure is brought down in a specific region, then everything basically struggles, right? If we think about it from a society standpoint, if for whatever reason a large food manufacturer ceases to operate for a couple of weeks, the entire supply chain is going to struggle to keep up, and there's going to be food shortages. So I think that the implications are definitely interesting, and what that drives is companies need to meet a certain standard, and from a practical standpoint, they need to understand what they currently have. They need to basically have a plan of action to remove, and again, from my experience, this could be as old as Windows NT or Windows 95 machines from their network, because ultimately a lot more of that system hardware is being connected to plant networks and is being connected for, again, data purposes or remote connectivity purposes because of COVID and such. But ultimately, the premiums, right? So the insurance premiums for cybersecurity breaches are increasing. And that is, again, that is just a pure statistical analysis of where the companies stand, how many breaches have happened in a specific vertical. And the company will tell them, well, for your facility with the current list of assets, you're going to pay 2 million a year in premiums if any breach were to occur. And so, I guess to bring this back into I think there's going to be a couple of different components, and there's already multiple players, and we've had conversations with them on Manufacturing Hub. But there's basically Dragos, Clarity, Nozomi Networks, Phoenix Contact, 40net, and there's going to be some more sort of IT oriented companies that still service OT, but they need to discover all of the networks and infrastructure. Then they need to basically secure them with, and again, that's a whole other segment of conversations. They need to put in firewalls, they need to segment, they need to implement VLANs, whatever, and they have to have ongoing monitoring. So I think AI becomes really interesting, to be honest with you, Dave, for all three of those points. And I really hope to see a world where, so if you go on the website, this is public information, you can see the vulnerabilities from different OEMs, right? So they will publish, here's the piece of hardware that has been discontinued maybe for 10 years, here's a problem with that specific OS, here's the vulnerability. I hope that the AI in its current state could at the very least make the link. If we have that on the plant floor, here are some of the mitigation, or I guess like here are some of the options that we can take as a manufacturer to solve some of those vulnerabilities. And so I see applications heading basically in that direction. Thoughts, comments?
I agree. I think that that is going to be what it takes in order to make most groups aware and willing to go spend money on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been an issue long before we started talking about it. Cybersecurity will be an issue long after this podcast is done, be it tomorrow or 50 years from now, unless the machines have taken over in 50 years, in which case there will be an AI Vlad and an AI Dave talking about how cybersecurity was never a worry because this was always going to be the end of times. But no, I think it's one of those. I think there are good, interesting AI tools in order to get there. I think that there will need to continue to be some amount of government regulation and or some amount of increased dollars for cybersecurity insurance, unless it just gets to the point where companies can't afford their cybersecurity insurance anymore, and then just say, hey, if there's an issue, we're just not paying the ransomware and we're just going out of business, sort of thing. And I know of at least a couple of organizations that was to the point that they got, and they just sent everyone home. And it's like, well, it was a good try, guys. We will figure out what the next company and organization is going to be because we cannot afford to go pay the ransomware, and we don't have backups, and we don't have any of these other things. Someone has just asked, how do we know it's not AI Dave or AI Vlad? And I can't see who that was because it doesn't show up.
You're going to have to come out to one of the three conferences that we mentioned earlier to know for sure. Otherwise, even I would be skeptical looking at us just VAs. You know what I mean? It's a good question.
just go mute Vlad for the rest of the show. Vlad is an AI, in case anyone hasn't met him in person, allegedly. We have a voice and body double for him that comes out to shows. That's why he's not very talkative whatsoever in shows. He may look like a cardboard cutout at shows because this has just been a one-person conversation, plus an AI. Yes, plus an AI across the board. But no, I think on cybersecurity, it's one of those that we're going to have to continue to push and groups hopefully at some point will take it seriously enough. But I don't know. Cybersecurity is really expensive. The only thing
Yeah.
more expensive than cybersecurity is being attacked and not being able to stay running and have everything behind some ransomware walls and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess like the last comment on that side that I will make is in a lot of those conversations, I usually point the customers towards fairly straightforward network hygiene, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why a lot of these networks or even assets fail, it's not because there's no fancy monitoring or cyber attack prevention software installed. It's really because the entire network is flat architecture, runs on switches that have absolutely no management, and it's not a result of, I would say, of the personnel. It's simply that the constraints and the KPIs on the OT side prioritize putting product out the door, and they're not necessarily trained to install firewalls, to segment networks, to create highly secure data pipelines, right? So everything is usually, we need to get this done as quickly as possible. And what's the quickest way is, well, you can just DMZ or basically open up the entire architecture to everything so that everything flows. But then you need to come in and secure that to the point that actually makes sense for the entire organization. So I think that the general sentiment that I have is just train, upskill your OT engineers as possible on some of these best practices, because quite frankly, I don't see them prioritizing that side unless they are aware of the problems that it may cause. Transitioning us to the next topic, Dave, which is industrial data. And I think we've already made a couple of comments as to AI impacting industrial data, right? So I think this is the non AI maybe portion or bullet. And to start off, and I guess I still see a strong push towards digital transformation. And I bundle again some of these terms. Again, I think they do have a different definition, but for the purposes of this conversation, whether you talk about digital transformation, Industry 4.0, IIoT, and some of the other tools or similarly or closely related acronyms, I think this is all part of industrial data. And I see Dave laughing because he knew that we were going to mention some of those inside of this bullet point. But data, I still see a lot of push towards getting data from the plant floor. I still see a lot of groups deploying better and I would say other tools on top of SCADA, MES. And I think there's a lot of, again, like different acronyms, even at that layer, depending on which vertical we are talking about. So I don't see any slowdown in 2026 when it comes to industrial data. I do see a couple of bottlenecks. We've talked about, obviously having the manpower to actually do the work. I think that is a significant constraint for many manufacturers. I think that those highly skilled in OT, again, need to understand the data layers a little bit better. I do see some constraints in terms of technology, but generally speaking, with enough of a budget and again, enough of personnel, you can certainly overcome and modernize whatever hardware, software stack that you're running. And so I only continue to see companies investing in these solutions. I think that we also have these like economic pressures. Again, in different countries it's going to be different, but ultimately the more closed off or more expensive labor becomes, the more companies are going to seek to automate. And I think that with modern automation, you're usually going to get a lot of those I don't want to call them APIs, right? But it's similar to a software API. You're going to have access to some of these data points that in a newer solution you would like to have access to. So I will continue to see, I believe, a strong push towards data on the industrial side in 2026. What are your thoughts, Dave?
I can summarize them in two parts. One, Vlad, I'm
Mhm.
still happy to hear that the rage bait is alive and well in 2026, with our inability to put things under single bullet points and go list endless terms that you're going to upset a lot of people by saying they're all the same thing. So, number one, that thank you for that. Number two, I think data is going to continue to be the most important part of these organizations moving forward. Without the data, it's going to be very difficult to go prove process improvements or go prove really any decision is the correct decision either before and or after those decisions have been made to increase production, to decrease production, to increase or decrease workers, to increase or decrease the amount of money that we're spending on automation tools, et cetera, et cetera. So without data, there's really no way to appropriately make choices for organizations of really any size. Having said that, data is king. Data will continue to be king. No matter how much we talk about these Industry 5.0 AI style solutions, MES style solutions, without our basic foundational building blocks of Industry 3 and Industry 4 of sensors and data collection and data visualization, all of them are practically useless.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be interesting, right? I think that it will obviously come to a point where there's going to be other bottlenecks. I think that for now companies will continue to push for more data. I also see, I want to say, a push from the OEM side to be providing different solutions that help with that journey, right? And obviously Dave and I have had many conversations last year, and we'll continue to have those conversations for you this year. I would say if any of our listeners and or viewers are curious and are going through an industrial data or digital transformation journey, would definitely be interested in hearing some of your thoughts and feedback as it relates to that. Moving us to systems integration, right? So we want to keep this a little bit brief. I will make a couple of comments, right? So I've mentioned a little bit earlier, what I'm seeing is that traditional systems integrators, and this is public information at this point, but many of them have basically started these digital transformation slash industry 4.0 practices, at least the ones that I have been having conversations with. So I believe that they are going to continue to basically go up the ISA stack, if you will, and get into more of these data slash MES slash ERP projects, where traditionally they were mostly aimed at capturing value for manufacturers on the plant floor. So I think that this is a major shift that a lot of integrators are making, those that at least have been traditionally in the OT space. And I would see that putting at least some pressure on hiring people with those software skill sets within those teams. So I'm curious to see how those teams go. I hope that we can get a couple of individuals again from within our circles to come in and make some comments as to how those practices are developing within the more traditional integrator. But that is my sort of like take on 2026 for integrators. They simply cannot stay sort of at the PLC, HMI, and SCADA layers anymore.
I agree. I think that we will continue to see the expansion of large integrators, both vertical. I guess on my side, probably as much verticals as, hey, we're really into this.
Mm.
We're into life sciences. We're going to expand into automotive, or we're going to expand into general manufacturing, or we're into automotive. We're going to go move to life sciences, or we're going to go make these moves and hire people in order to go build and expand the practice. I think some of them will certainly go larger vertically.
Hmm.
I think that we will continue to see more and more. I think we'll see more smaller niche groups who come out I think we will also see more kind of medium-sized systems integrators get gobbled up by larger integrators, which I think
Mhm.
is the trajectory that we've watched probably in the last 5 to 10 years. Is more and more times people are buying these smaller niche integrators and trying to go expand their business in a bunch of different areas. And I have to imagine that we will continue to see that moving into 2026 and beyond. I feel like that
Yeah.
brings up the next topic really well: career changes, right? I think that there are lots of career changes in industrial automation, and I view it as a couple of different angles, right? I view it as people who are starting their journey, post high school, going into college, post college. I think that there are also people who are retraining or looking to go get into the industrial side of things. So I look at that at one side, and then I think, as you mentioned earlier in the show, Vlad, there have been lots of rifts, reduction in forces. There have been lots of layoffs. There have been lots of AI focused layoffs, and so we'll see a lot of movement in those different groups and organizations. Having said that, man, there are a lot of job postings for senior developers, senior engineers, who are either looking to move positions, or who are either looking to move up, or who are either looking to do a bunch of different things.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, right? Because as you mentioned, I think there's a talent pool of highly capable software engineers on the market, a lot of whom are looking at other industries for a variety of reasons, including industrial automation. And I believe that sometimes you can get a false sense of how easy it is to get into an industry from an outsider perspective, right? And I think that if you have a background that is purely software, I think it's easy to try and get into the industrial space without necessarily knowing all the nuances. And I think that it is, I don't want to say it's necessarily harder than ever, I think, to enter the manufacturing space. I think it's just as hard as it has always been. I think that you need to have some, at least, like process understanding, interest, and or exposure. I think that you still need to learn the traditional programming approaches, whether you like it or not. I still see a lot of customers use ladder logic, despite there being a lot of talks between structured text and sort of the traditional PLC programming. I think that if you come in at again, at least with that background, maybe at the SCADA and MES layers, you can circumvent some of those requirements. But in a general sense, for traditional industrial automation, I just don't see it changing in terms of career requirements as much as people seem to portray, with AI and everything that's going on right now.
I I think that there will always need there will always be the need to have some of those foundational requirements.
Hmm.
So with that, I completely agree. I think it has never been easy to go break into industrial automation or manufacturing, especially at a super sexy job of, hey, I'm going to go sit behind the computer and not have to go do a bunch of other different difficult things, or learn new skills, or learn new languages, et cetera, et cetera. I don't really view that as a, we're suddenly going to go solve this problem with AI. If you want to get into the industry, you're probably going to have to take a less than great job in order to get some of that experience, so that you can go make lateral moves, or upward moves into the place that you actually want to be. Having said that, if you're willing to show up to work every day at a manufacturing facility, there are probably, on the industrial automation side, on the maintenance and engineering side, that there are probably opportunities that you can go find in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I would agree. Transitioning us into a very different conversation, but extremely important as to, or based as to what was happening in our space late 2025. So the venture capital slash private equity activities in manufacturing and industrial automation. And I would assume that a lot of people are by now aware that there's been two major, at least, acquisitions, one of which was Prophecy and the other
Mhm.
one was of Kepware. And again, I think that we can discuss the tools and their use cases in a full episode, but basically,
Mhm.
the tools are extremely sticky and are basically at the MES and data layers for many different organizations and manufacturing companies, especially the very large, I would say, enterprise and the private equity group that has acquired both of those tools obviously has done their due diligence. Whether or not they
Mhm.
paid the right price for both of those acquisition remains to be seen, but ultimately there's been already talks about increase in price.
Mhm.
And I can't remember who made that post, like someone actually from, I believe, a background in Kepware has looked at what has been announced for multiple customers. And so I think that's going to lead to a couple of different things, but ultimately, I think it's going to re-bring up the question of, are we going to switch to a different provider? And I think we can discuss who those companies are, but ultimately, are we going to switch to a different provider? Are we going to look for other solutions altogether? I think it probably increased the valuation of some of those competing companies and probably positioned them a little bit better for their next rounds of raises. But it involves a lot of important, I would say, nuances in manufacturing. My general take, Dave, right, and I'm curious to kind of like hear what you have to say, but I think that the manufacturers that are of a significant size, where both of these tools or one of the tools is already in place, I don't think that they are going to obviously they will consider migrating, but I think that the cost of the tools in the grand scheme of things for those manufacturers is not significant enough. And I would assume, I obviously was not part of those calculations, that the group that is raising the prices has already done the research and understands, well, we can increase by 20% with this amount of people maybe considering a migration. So I don't think that we're going to see as big of a shuffle or shift as maybe some are suggesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think both of those were a little interesting. Now, I personally have never seen GE's Prophecy on
Mm,
a plant floor that I have worked.
yep,
I maybe know of a couple of people who have used it in the past. I have much more experience with Kepware. As I like to
yep,
say, about half the time I'm putting it in, about half the time I'm taking it out. I did both last year,
hmm,
and at least on the newer modern Kepware pricing, it isn't particularly expensive. It's a sub $1,000 a year sort of cost most of the time with what I've seen most of the time. So having said that, if it goes up 20%, I'd imagine it's still fairly sticky. I
yep,
imagine most groups would go look at leaving Kepware or perhaps not buying Kepware and going to a different direction. Maybe that is a reason that they go and look in that direction as they go and look at drivers. There are, I don't know, the drivers are one of those. Is Kepware is very much the brand that most people know that are looking of, hey, I'm looking for X driver. Kepware has X driver. I'm going to go in that direction. And there aren't a ton of those other companies that I'm aware of that are
yep.
selling drivers by the driver server license in a per year basis. Now, is that an opportunity for some companies to go spin off that as a particular service? Absolutely. If they're looking to go capture some market, I think that that could be particularly interesting. Having said that, I think those are both very public, but I probably know 20, 30, 50 different people in the last year that have gone to work for a service provider or a panel shop or a systems integrator or something else that was either spun up or acquired by venture capital or private equity. And so I think it's certainly interesting. It certainly seems as there is money in the industrial space, and many of our longtime friends of the show have companies and organizations that are venture backed. And there is
Yep.
certainly venture money that continues to be pumped into the industrial manufacturing automation sides of the business, which means something, right? It means that there
Mhm.
must be some potential to the market. As to if it means that the cost of everything is going to go up on the industrial side, I don't really know. We've certainly talked for as long as this show has gone on, if not longer, the cost of hourly rates and other things. A lot of those have been really stagnant for the last 6 years of the show and the last 5 or 6 years before this show. So do we see that goes and increase the prices? Maybe. I don't know. I suppose all of that remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? So, having read some of the financial yearly reports from the large OEMs, I believe that there's, and obviously this is not some new breakthrough information. There's a
Mhm.
shift from being a hardware vendor towards being more of a software based company, and this is true for Siemens, for Rockwell, for a variety of different OEMs, because simply because the premium or the multiples when it comes to software acquisitions are significantly higher. And again, that's a whole other conversation, but ultimately I think more and more companies are seeing the benefits of, building a product that ultimately is then licensed to different companies, and there's very little overhead to basically deploying that product. So I think that the acquisitions were very interesting. I personally have used both of those products and have extensive experience even with Prophecy. So I know the product well, but I am a little bit surprised. Obviously, looking at the market share, how many companies actually use Prophecy, and I just don't see them being able to, plug in a different solution, at least in the short term. So we'll see what happens. I would be curious to see if they acquire any other companies that maybe synergize well with both of those tools. And I think it also, again, to my earlier comment, positions some of the other alternatives and other software companies in our space for a potential exit, right? As well as an acquisition, I guess, by someone that is not just a provider but a private equity firm in this specific instance. So it's going to be very interesting.
Absolutely. Let's go talk about plans
Yep.
for 2026. Vlad, what do your plans look like for this year? What are your goals, your hopes, your dreams, all of those things?
Well, so there's, I guess, a couple of things, but ultimately still very involved in the industrial systems integration space. I am pushing quite heavily on the network side, as I've mentioned a little bit earlier in this episode, pushing heavily on the data side. Again, I have some content coming out on both of those fronts on the Joltec website as well as YouTube channel. I continue to push for some of those projects. Again, traditional integration, modernization of integration, and or data and network solutions. At least that is my general high level plans for 2026 when it comes to work. How about you?
Awesome. No, I think that's exciting. I would say on our side, on the Kaplan side, we're going to continue to work with our current clients. We're always looking for new clients on the process optimization side, on the data collection, visualization. What do we do with it now side? How do we go increase throughput, reduce expenses? We do a lot of work on ignition. As I said, we'll probably continue to grow the development team, and we'll have a couple of tools and products coming out on the ignition side. Hopefully Q1. Q1 is our plan. Hopefully end of this month, very beginning of February, we'll have some beta versions that we can go talk about out. That we can go talk out more. And so very excited. Yeah, very excited to go continue those couple of conferences coming up in the first half of the year. So very
Mhm.
excited to go out and see people and get ready to go talk about all of the fun things that it is that we get to do.
Good. Awesome. Um, Book wise, so I guess like as we close off the show,
Mhm.
I did bring, I guess, a book title which, again, for those that haven't listened to the show before, usually we close off with a book recommendation, with a career recommendation, and a couple of other questions. And we'll pick that up as we get a guest on next week. But I do have an interesting book, which I've read over the holidays, which is Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni.
Hmm.
And the book is surprisingly, and I think it was recommended by one of the guests last year. It
Hmm.
is about consulting, right? It is about the role consultants play in the general landscape of things. And I'll spare all the details, I guess, about the book. It's about an acquisition or a merger of a smaller consulting firm into a larger one.
Hmm.
And the general premise, right, is that there's different consulting styles, which I've been researching and trying to better understand as I have gone down the road of some of those projects. And the preferred way, right, and why the book has gotten this title is basically being very open with your customer. And I think that sort of like openness and honesty and discussing like what's possible, what's not possible, needs to be at the core of the consulting practices. So the book was very interesting, right? It provided some different perspectives on how things have always been done and how this acquired company is doing them, and sort of painted a nice, interesting story. And see, even Frank Lam recognizes the book. I have not heard about this author, but yeah, super interesting. I recommend it to anyone who's been either on the maybe more technical side of the industrial automation space, and or maybe is just getting into consulting and sort of managing clients for their specific projects.
Absolutely no. I think that's exciting. As I told several people, I did absolutely no work over the last couple of weeks of the break. So a lot of the reading and other things that I was doing was building and rebuilding a network. So most of that on my side has been on networking and firewalls and various switches and all of those fun things that I almost never have time to get into while I'm not actively on vacation, rebuilding networks and ordering thousands of feet of Cat6 cables. So that is a lot of what my break had to do. And as Vlad mentioned, for all of our newer guests, we've got a full battery of questions that we will go answer. We'll go ask all of our guests in the coming weeks. But no, everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Again, this has been episode 241 of Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave Griffith. This guy over here is Vlad Romanov. We go live just about every Wednesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time, 10 p.m. Central European time. I don't remember what time, early in the morning, 6-ish o'clock in the morning in Australia, and everywhere in between. But come hang out with us, go talk automation, manufacturing, and everything in between. If you have made it this far, please do all those fun things like subscribe, rate us 5 stars on the podcast platform. If you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button for Manufacturing Hub Network so you guys will know when we're live, and you guys can go catch all of the videos. If you're on LinkedIn, follow myself and follow Vlad, or feel free to go connect with us. We always like to have conversations with our listeners. And if you're watching us in podcast format or listening to us in podcast format,